What sort of 5-year-old were you? How did you get on with your mother? What was your father like? What was it like at school? When did you first have sex? The chair.
I miss my father a great deal. I wish he was still alive.
You were close to him, were you?
Yes, I was fairly close. I mean, we argued a lot about politics. A bit of left-wing socialism, a bit of hard-nosed, ideological, input, Benite, wouldn't be half a bad idea, as he put it. I mean, they and their actions and people like them resulted in the Labour Party being out of power for a generation. Now, my father contributed a wee bit to that, and we did have terrible arguments.
Do you have thoughts about what causes differences between people? Why was John Major different from Terry Major Ball? You came from a family with a brother.
Why am I different from Miles
Why are you
Mandelson?
different from your brother? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, my brother and I had the same upbringing, same family, went to the same school, but we have led very different lives from an early age.
He's a
clinical psychologist. What drove me to be, an organizer? Somebody who always wanted to apply his beliefs, his judgments, to change things, to improve things, to put things right. What drove me...
On a very broad scale.
On a very broad
he's
scale.
Doing it one-to-one.
Well, he's doing it one-to-one. He's helping people one-to-one and helping them sort out their lives and make them feel better and to cure them if they have psychological problems. Whereas I'm on a broader canvas. I'm trying to create the society, to create the National Health Service, in which people like my brother can do a decent, properly organised, well-paid job in order to help other individual members of society. Well, there's obviously a place for both of us.
Well, let's explore it a bit. I mean, what sort of child were you?
I think I'd have been quite boisterous, quite outward-going, seemingly quite self-confident, but well-behaved, with good manners and a concern for people around me. I think that probably more than anything what my mother and father gave me, and they were very important to me. And my father's not alive, but my mother still is, and she remains very important to me, is a sense of decency, of what is right and wrong. And I remember this from my early years, doing what I wanted to do, and always knowing that if I did wrong, I would disappoint them. And it was the biggest sanction of all. And if I didn't work hard, they would be disappointed, or if I didn't behave well towards other people, they would be disapproving. Not everyone applies that to politics. I mean, you don't take a personal value system, and then apply that to an idea of how you think society should be organised. And then once you've done that, go out and help organise it for yourself through democratic politics, through the Labour Party. Not everyone does that. What drove me to do that, I really can't say. I'm not absolutely sure. I suppose it was a bit to do with coming from a fairly political family.
Yes, because
But then that didn't apply to my brother. It only applied to me, in the sense that we came from the same family, but he didn't go into politics.
Let's talk about that for a moment, and then come back to the question of you and your brother. I mean, your maternal grandfather, your mother's father, was Herbert Morrison, who was Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary and a famous Labour politician. And I think you did meet him.
I met him quite a lot. He died when I was 11. And although we weren't that close a family, my grandmother died and he married again, and that created a bit of a breach in the family. He also lived on the other side of London, and throughout his life he had one eye, and his later years, his other eye started to fail. It wasn't very easy for him to drive himself across London. We couldn't go to him. He had to come to us. But he used to come once a month, and he used to steam up the road in his little Morris car, his bow tie, great grey hair. He used to come to lunch on a Saturday. And I have a very vivid memory of him coming down the path, greeting me, us talking, him staying to lunch, always tucked his napkin in his collar.
Both your parents were Labour voters, is that right? And
Solid Labour voters,
So, I mean,
Labour members. I mean, in the family. I mean,
that was there, yes.
Oh, it was there. I mean, every month there would be going to Labour meetings,
and you would
Labour
talk
people would be coming into the house, and we would be talking about politics a great deal of the time.
Did you talk more with? Did you sort of? Did you talk more with your mother or your father, or was it both? Or
I talked to them both. I think my mother was chiefly responsible for making me into a sort of fairly moderate, mainstream, middle of the road sort of Labour Party member, apart from a short time when I was busy heckling cabinet ministers over Vietnam and taking part in demonstrations within the earliest demonstrations. I remember I went on with my mother. I remember when Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech. We were straight on to the streets, and that was my mother who was, demonstrating against his racism. With my father, in later years when I was at school, we tended to argue a lot about politics. My father had this view during the 1970s and early 1980s about the Labour Party, that a bit of left-wing socialism, a bit of hard-nosed ideological, input, Benite, wouldn't be half a bad idea. It's about time the Labour Party sort of got a bit of grit into its soul, as he put it. And it's led him to all sorts of positions, and I remember one terrible argument we had, it was many times, and when he was saying about the militant tendency who were then dominating the Labour Party Young Socialists, all changed of course now. And he said, these young people have got to be given their head and they're entitled to their views, and we've got to be tolerant and live and let live in our party. These people were wrecking our party. They were undermining what we stood for and driving a real wedge between us and our natural traditional supporters as a party. They and their actions and people like them resulted in the Labour Party being out of power for a generation. Now, my father contributed a wee bit to that. I miss my father a great deal. I wish he was still alive.
You were close to him, were you?
Yes, I was fairly close. We argued a lot, but we were close. I liked him. There was a mutual admiration. He admired me for what I did and what I did in politics, what I did at school. He was very proud. And I went to Oxford University, for example, although he never lifted a finger to encourage me to do so. And probably because both my mother and he would not have wanted to have felt that I was disappointing them if I failed to get in. I wish he was still alive, because he would derive so much amusement and enjoyment, from what I'm doing now and seeing me in the House of Commons. He would think it was enormous fun.
Was he quite a sort of easygoing sort of chap then? He didn't, because his career was he?
He was very
ambitious.
He was not at all ambitious in his own career. I never quite understood.
You also were quite left wing at one point, I think.
I was
and
quite
even organised at the school. Did you not organise some sort of dispute within your school?
I don't know whether that was being left-wing. It was just being democratic. I was a rebel at school, and, with others, rebelled against the prefect system, and it was a terribly hierarchical, very sort of hidebound, old-style grammar school. We got petitions up, we led protests, all in a very mild way, very respectful way. And our old headmaster got up in the assembly one day and denounced me and my chief collaborator as industrial militants, who were pulling apart the fabric of our school community.
So earlier on you were sort of, in a sense, in your father's camp as the more left-wing side, and then you moved across to the more Mandelson, well, Herbert Morrison school of...
I think from a very early age, I quickly became my grandfather's grandson.
Right. I'm fascinated by the process whereby you became identified with him more than your brother did. It's one of life's mysteries, probably.
I really do not know why, brother one was more interested in jazz, writing poetry, going out partying, as my brother did. This was a very normal way, and whereas I was sort of busy organising.
You said that you went with your mum on marches. Did your brother come?
I don't remember my brother coming, no.
Because he was older than you, wasn't he?
He was 4 years older than me. I think he found me a pretty infernal nuisance, actually, because I was always getting in his way and tripping him up in what he was doing, and I don't know, I do remember some terrible experiences, terrible altercations with me and my brother when I would be sort of ragging him or just generally being a pestilential nuisance. I think he found me pretty tiresome, and if he could get away from me whilst I was out of the house on anything, whether it be at the cinema or on a demonstration, he'd be happy just by himself, getting on with his own life.
So it was something that maybe...
We're perfectly close now, let me
yeah.
stress.
All brothers have altercations. But it does suggest, that does suggest a possible connection, that you and your mother had a bond in terms of game marching and politics and so forth, that
Possibly.
perhaps he and her
Possibly.
didn't have in that respect.
Must have been...
They've been close in other ways, but not through that.
Yes.
It was a way for you, a way that you
Yes,
were close
must
to
have
your
been,
mum.
my mother must have been pretty close. We were close.
What did your mum feel when she was a child about having a very successful politician as a dad who's possibly never there, or you must have mixed feelings about it anyway?
I've talked to my mother quite a lot about that in the past, and it's created a real understanding, I think, on my part, and a concern for the children of leading politicians. And I feel it quite deeply, because I know that when my mother was at school, she found it difficult being the daughter of a very prominent politician, constantly being teased and slightly ragged by other pupils, but also teachers, wittingly or unwittingly, would take advantage of the fact that she was, or she had the father that she did, and they would make political remarks and slightly sort of difficult behaviour. And they would think nothing of it, probably. They'd think, oh, well, they were just having a bit of fun or a bit of teasing. For my mother, it made her quite self-conscious, quite embarrassed. I think it made my mother more shy and withdrawn than she might otherwise have been, and I think it was a discouragement to her to, get on in school and education. So it was an inhibition for her, and I feel...
Was she wild about the idea of you becoming a...
No, she's not wild about the idea of me becoming a politician. She never has been.
In your childhood, what sort of person did she come across as?
Quiet, elegant, gracious, softly spoken, but with tremendous steel. If you incurred my mother's disapproval, you would know it. No shouting and screaming, no histrionics. But if you got on the wrong side of her, there would be a disapproval of which you were very quickly aware.
Because this is so often the case in the family backgrounds of very successful men. They have so often there's a very disciplined mother.
My mother's very
strong person.
My mother's very stoic.
Mm.
She'd been brought up in difficult circumstances. She'd had to learn to be disciplined, to bite her lip, to swallow hard, not to do or say or anything that might remotely cause any embarrassment to my grandfather. I mean, politicians are fairly sort of egocentric, sort of selfish people, really. Pretty grim politicians by and large. And they expect their families and almost everyone and everything to fit in around them. And I think that conditioned my mother a great deal. And I think still now, I mean, I know still now, she's a disciplined, stoic person. She was when my father died, very, very stoic, and she was she was and has remained the backbone of the family. I mean, she didn't crumble at all. Very stiff upper lip, my mum.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that your father had died? And were you...
I can't remember that.
Oh, okay, don't worry. Another political character, do you want to take a moment?
Number one.
Because another sort of political figures that were back there in your childhood, of course, were the Wilson family, who were living in Hampstead Garden Suburb as well. And I just wondered about that, because I think I read somewhere that your mother that you did go as a child 3 or 4 times to visit the Wilsons in Downing Street after Harold Wilson had been elected.
Well,
but your mother always refused to go, apparently.
My mother had no time for that sort of social networking at all. The last thing she wanted to do was to tear up to town and go into number 10 Downing Street. She'd had that. She didn't want any more of it. My father, of course, though, I mean, that was great fun for him. Again, you know, my brother didn't go. I don't know why when he didn't. I'm sure he would have had the same opportunity. But, I mean, for me, it was tremendous going up to Downing Street. It was in the 1960s. I was only in my early teens. My father and I went, but my brother didn't. I thought it was great fun.
What did you do when you got there? Did you sort of have tea or something?
Well, what did we do? I only went 2 or 3 times. Usually for trooping the colour. The Prime Minister can invite friends to view Trooping the Colour, you know, with all the soldiers going round the Queen's birthday, from the back garden at number 10 Downing Street. And we did that with all the Commonwealth High Commissioners and family and friends. And afterwards you go into Downing Street. Now I remember stuffing my face with government hospitality fund provided bits of asparagus rolled up in brown bread and very, very, very thin scrapings of smoked salmon. I was aware that I was doing something special, that I was close to power. I was excited. I was excited being taken into the cabinet room and sat down. I was excited being taken into the Foreign Office and seeing where George Brown sat. These things were exciting.
The reputation that you have in some descriptions of you in the newspaper is not always very flattering. There's a Brian Gould quote, one of the most charming but also one of the most manipulative and devious people I've ever dealt with. Does those sort of comments upset you or annoy you?
They slightly upset me, especially in the case of somebody like Brian Gould, when I know that that's not what he really believes, and that's not what he really felt. And remarks like that come from personal bitterness and disappointment. I mean, he's showing his anger about what's happened to him. He'd like to be leader of the Labour Party, and the only explanation that he could find for not being leader of the Labour Party was to blame somebody else, in this case me.
I mean, it must be terrifying for all the the shadow cabinet, all the main Labour players. It must be a very uncomfortable feeling that, you know, you've got these people digging around trying to, you know, get any old way of running you down, of character assassination.
It's a real hazard. You know, when you have a party like the Conservatives who employ up to 100 people researching not just the politics and the policies of their opponents, but their personal lives, and what they can dredge up and what they can sort of feed into the tabloid press in order to discredit their opponents. I mean, when you know that's going on, as it is, of course it creates a concern. I'm a tough fighter. I mean, I can play hardball, which is why I've attracted, I suppose, some of the comments that I have. The reason why people like to discredit me, certainly amongst Conservatives, is because they fear me.